The aliens stood motionless as Jack approached, their environmental suit reflecting the orange sky. Through the tinted visor, he could make out scaled skin and large, amber eyes that tracked his every move. Neither of them reached for weapons, but tension crackled in the toxic air between them. Jack stopped 10 paces away and raised his hand slowly, the universal gesture of peace, or so he hoped. The alien tilted their head, then mimicked his gesture. Progress. A sharp hiss from Jack's suit broke the silence. His oxygen filtration was failing faster than expected. The alien's head snapped toward the sound, those amber eyes widening slightly. To Jack's surprise, they pointed at his suit, then at their ship, making a beckoning motion. Inside the alien vessel, Jack's translator finally managed to process their language. The alien's name was Mira, and she was, of all things, a diplomatic courier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Your filter is degrading," Mira said through the translator. "Our systems are compatible. I have spares." She moved to a storage compartment, then hesitated. "This goes against every protocol." "So does crashing on an unknown planet," Jack replied. "But we don't have much choice, do we?" A screech from outside made them both jump. Through the viewport, they saw a creature land on Jack's distant ship. It had 6 legs and leather-like wings, and its saliva melted through metal on contact. "The atmosphere attracts them," Mira explained, finally pulling out the spare filter parts. "They feed on anything not native to this planet. We cannot stay in our ships." As if to emphasize her point, more creatures appeared in the sky. Their ships would be stripped to the bones within days. They needed a better shelter, and they needed it soon. Jack worked on his suit while Mira surveyed the landscape through her ship's sensors. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. Why help an enemy? How much could they trust each other? What would their governments say? There, Mira pointed to a rocky outcropping. Natural cave formation. Defensible position. High ground for better visibility. She paused. "We should go together." Jack finished, installing the filter. His suit readings returned to normal. She hadn't sabotaged the parts. "Together," he agreed. "But we need to salvage what we can first." They worked quickly, gathering supplies from both ships. Every few minutes, more creatures would appear, forcing them to take cover. They could only watch as the beasts began tearing into their vessels. As they made their way toward the cave, Jack noticed Mira struggling with a heavy container. Without thinking, he moved to help her carry it. She stiffened at first, then relaxed slightly. "This planet will kill us if we don't work together," she said quietly. "Perhaps that is why we crashed here." Jack looked at the strange sky, the deadly wildlife, and their disintegrating ships. Maybe the universe has a sick sense of humor. Mira's translator crackled with what might have been a laugh. "In that, human, we agree." Military ships descended from the orange sky, like birds of prey. 2 human vessels, 3 reptilian cruisers. Their weapons weren't active, but the tension was clear even from deep within the ancient facility. "This is Captain Reed of the Earth Fleet. Jack, if you can hear this, stay where you are. We're getting you out." Moments later, a reptilian voice crackled through Mira's comm. "Diplomat Mira, remain in position. Do not engage with the human." "That's an order." Jack and Mira exchanged glances. After everything they'd survived together, going back to being enemies felt wrong. "They can't know what we've discovered," Mira said quietly. "This facility, the test, the truth about this planet, it could change everything. Or they'll classify it and bury the evidence." Jack replied, "Keep the Cold War going because it's easier than peace." Armed troops from both sides were approaching the cave entrance. They had minutes at most to decide. "Attention rescue teams," Jack broadcast on an open channel. "This is cargo pilot Jack. I'm with Diplomat Mira. We're both safe, but we're not separating. We need both sides to send 2 unarmed representatives. What we found here concerns everyone." Silence filled the comms. Then angry voices erupted, ordering them to follow standard protocols. Mira stepped up to her calm. With respect, Commanders, we reject those protocols. This facility predates both our civilizations. Its purpose was to prove different species could cooperate. We've passed its test. Now you must pass yours. They stood together at the facility's entrance, watching as both sides argued among themselves. Finally, two figures broke away from each group, a human science officer and a reptilian diplomat. "Show them," Jack said to Mira. "Show them everything." The ancient chamber's revelations stunned both sides. The holograms, the atmospheric controls, the proof that advanced civilizations had once believed in cooperation over conflict. "This changes our entire understanding of galactic history," the science officer whispered. "It changes the future too," the reptilian diplomat added. "If we let it." More teams arrived, this time scientists and diplomats instead of soldiers. The military ships withdrew to a safe distance. For the first time in a century, humans and reptilians worked side by side, studying the ancient facility's secrets. Jack watched it all with Mira by his side. "Think they'll listen?" he asked. "They'll have to," she replied, "because we're not done breaking protocols yet." They smiled at each other, knowing their own story of survival and friendship would be the strongest evidence that change was possible. 1 year after their crash, Jack and Mira stood before the Combined Species Council. The chamber was filled with representatives from both civilizations, gathered to hear their testimony. "The ancient facility didn't just test us," Jack explained to the assembly. "It showed us a path forward. The atmospheric restoration protocols we activated have already begun to transform the planet." Mira stepped forward, her scales shimmering under the council lights. "What was once toxic is becoming habitable. But more importantly, the transformation requires both human and reptilian biosignatures to continue. The ancients ensured their legacy would only benefit those who choose to work together." Holographic displays showed the planet's changing surface. Where there had been purple crystals and black vegetation, new life was taking root. The corrosive atmosphere was clearing, revealing blue skies. "We propose establishing the first joint colony," Mira continued, "a place where both our peoples can live and work together, studying the ancient technology and building a shared future." The council chamber erupted in heated discussions. Some opposed any change to the status quo. Others saw the opportunity for something greater than endless Cold War. "Look at what we've already accomplished," Jack said over the noise. "Joint research teams have decoded more of the facility's database in 1 year than either side could have done alone in a decade. We've discovered traces of similar facilities on other worlds. This was never meant to be an isolated experiment." The council's final vote was close, but hope won over fear. The planet would become a neutral zone, open to settlers from both civilizations. Jack and Mira were appointed as its first joint governors. As they left the council chamber, Jack turned to Mira. "Remember when we first crashed? I thought that planet would kill us. Instead, it showed us how to live," Mira replied. "The ancients were right. Sometimes the most forbidden line is the one between enemy and friend." They watched through a viewport as ships from both fleets prepared for the journey to their new home. This time, they wouldn't be arriving as crashed survivors, but as pioneers of a new age. "What should we name it?" Jack asked. "The planet needs a proper name now." Mira's scales shifted to the warm colors of sunrise. "In both our languages, there's a word that means beginning. Let's start there." Far below them, on a once deadly world, the first shoots of green broke through purified soil, reaching toward a clear sky that belonged to everyone. The first rain came without warning. Purple droplets fell from the orange sky, sizzling where they landed. Jack and Mira barely made it to the cave in time. From their shelter, they watched in horror as the toxic rain ate through the outer layer of their environmental suits left outside. "The rain is worse than the air," Mira observed, checking the damage to their gear. "We have maybe 3 more rainstorms before our suits fail completely." Jack nodded grimly. They had managed to create a makeshift camp in the cave, using salvaged equipment from both ships. Their supplies were laid out in careful sections. Human food on one side, reptilian on the other. But with each passing hour, those lines blurred out of necessity. "The water recycler isn't working properly," Jack said, examining their shared filtration system. "We need more parts." "The plants outside." Mira pointed through the cave entrance. "Their structure suggests they store water." But she trailed off, watching as a small animal touched one of the black vegetation stalks and immediately began to dissolve. They spent the next hours planning a harvesting mission. Jack rigged up extra shielding for their suits using pieces of their ship's hull, while Mira analyzed the plants for the safest approach. Working together felt increasingly natural. Despite everything they'd been taught about each other's species, the harvest attempt nearly killed them both. They had just finished cutting through a thick stalk when one of the flying predators appeared. Jack slipped while running, his suit scraping against the crystalline ground. Air hissed from the tear. Without hesitation, Mira grabbed him and slapped a patch over the damage. Her own suit's arm was exposed to the toxic atmosphere in the process, scales beginning to blister underneath. They half-carried each other back to the cave, both injured but alive. "Why did you risk yourself?" Jack asked later, as they treated their wounds with their dwindling medical supplies. "Your people would say you should have left me." Mira's inner eyelids flickered. A gesture Jack was learning meant deep thought. "My people say many things about humans. That you are aggressive, untrustworthy, primitive." She adjusted his bandage with surprising gentleness. "But here, I see only another person trying to survive. Perhaps we are both victims of old fears." A distant rumble interrupted them. Another storm was coming. They watched through the cave entrance as lightning split the orange sky, illuminating the skeletal remains of their ships below. "We need to find better shelter soon," Jack said, looking at their damaged suits, "or a way off this planet." Mira touched the cave wall thoughtfully. "These formations, they're too regular, almost like they were made." Jack studied the wall more closely. Now that she mentioned it, the patterns did seem artificial. "You think someone lived here, in this atmosphere, or they made it this way," Mira replied. "We should explore deeper into the cave system. There might be answers." They looked at each other, knowing what it meant. Going deeper would require perfect trust and cooperation. One wrong move, one moment of suspicion, and they would both die. "Together?" Jack asked. Mira nodded. "Together." The cargo ship tumbled through the burning atmosphere like a dying star. Inside the cockpit, Jack gripped his controls with white knuckles, fighting against the ship's death spiral. Warning lights flashed across his console as pieces of the hull tore away in the violent descent. "Come on, hold together," he muttered through clenched teeth. The meteor storm had appeared out of nowhere, shredding his navigation systems and punching holes through the engine housing. Now all he could do was try to survive the landing. The ground rushed up to meet him, a landscape of sharp purple rocks and twisted black vegetation under an orange sky. Jack pulled back on the controls with all his strength, trying to level out. The ship's belly scraped against rock formations, sending sparks flying. Metal screamed as the cargo hold ripped open, spilling its contents across the alien terrain. When the ship finally stopped moving, Jack sat motionless in his seat, hardly daring to breathe. His suit's environment readings flashed red. The atmosphere outside was highly toxic. Without his protective gear, he'd be dead in minutes. "This is cargo ship Delta 7 broadcasting an emergency signal," he said into his comm unit. Nothing but static answered. The crash had taken out his long-range communications. Movement caught his eye through the cracked view screen. At first, he thought it was just debris from his own crash. But then he saw it. Another ship, sleek and silver, making an equally desperate landing about a kilometer away. Its design was unmistakable. Reptilian Empire. Jack's heart rate spiked. The reptilians had been humanity's bitter rivals for the past century. Both species were expanding through the galaxy, fighting over habitable worlds and resources. Direct combat was rare, but the Cold War between them had claimed many lives through accidents and misunderstandings. He watched as the alien ship crashed, its landing no prettier than his own. Protocol said he should avoid contact at all costs, but as he ran system checks on his own vessel, the truth became clear. His ship would never fly again. The cargo hold was gone, along with most of his supplies. His oxygen filtration system was damaged, giving him maybe 2 days of breathable air. Looking at his suit's atmospheric readings again, Jack felt a chill. The planet's air wasn't just toxic, it was corrosive. Already he could see the purple mist eating away at exposed metal surfaces. Without supplies or communication, this world would kill him. The decision weighed heavy in his gut as he watched a lone figure emerge from the reptilian ship. Their environmental suit was different from his, but he could see they were checking similar readings, probably coming to the same horrible conclusions. 2 people, 2 ships, both stranded on a planet that wanted them dead. Jack gathered his emergency kit and checked his suit's seals one last time. Every step away from his ship felt like a betrayal of everything he'd been taught about dealing with the reptilians. But survival had a way of changing the rules. He didn't know if the alien would shoot him on sight. He didn't know if they could even communicate. All he knew was that alone, they would both die on this toxic rock. Together, they might have a chance. Jack started walking toward the alien ship, his boots crunching on purple crystals that seemed to whisper with each step. The fate of 2 species' diplomatic relations was about to be decided on this deadly world, whether anyone back home wanted it or not. The deeper they ventured into the cave system, the more obvious it became that these tunnels were artificial. Smooth walls gave way to carved corridors, strange symbols glowing faintly with their own light. Jack and Mira's lights revealed geometric patterns too perfect to be natural. "Look at this," Mira called out, her clawed hand tracing over a series of inscriptions. These markings, they're mathematical sequences, universal constants. Jack examined another wall covered in what looked like star charts. "These are old, really old, but they show our sector of space." He pointed to familiar constellations. Whoever built this knew about both our worlds, long before either of our species reached the stars. Their discovery of the central chamber left them speechless. A vast circular room opened before them, its ceiling lost in darkness above. In the center stood a pillar of light, surrounded by control panels covered in the same glowing symbols they'd seen in the corridors. "This technology," Mira whispered, "it's far beyond anything our peoples have achieved." She approached one of the panels, studying the symbols. "These patterns, they're showing atmospheric composition. This planet wasn't always toxic." Jack moved to another console, wiping away centuries of dust. "You're right. Look at these readings. Somebody deliberately changed this world. Made it uninhabitable." He paused, looking at more data. "No, not uninhabitable. They made it hostile to force cooperation." A holographic display suddenly sparked to life between them, showing 2 different species working together to survive on the planet's surface. The images were alien to both of them, but the message was clear. "A test," Mira said, her voice filled with wonder. "This entire planet is a test, to see if different species could overcome their differences when faced with a common threat. And we're not the first ones to be tested," Jack added, finding records of other crashes, other pairs of beings forced to cooperate or die. Some succeeded, many failed. Their examination was interrupted by a rumbling sound. The chamber's lights pulsed, and new symbols appeared on the consoles. A mechanical voice spoke in multiple languages, finally finding ones they could understand. "Genetic signatures detected. Beginning compatibility assessment. Initiating survival protocol." The pillar of light in the center of the room intensified. The exit sealed behind them with a heavy thud. Jack and Mira looked at each other, realizing they had triggered something ancient and powerful. "I don't think we're getting out of here until we pass their test," Jack said grimly. Mira's scales shifted color slightly. a sign of determination. Then we prove them right. We show that cooperation is possible. She held out her hand to him. Ready, human. Jack took her hand, noticing how their different biologies somehow fit together perfectly. Ready, friend. The ancient chamber hummed with power as Jack and Mira faced their first challenge. Two separate control stations rose from the floor, their displays showing complex patterns that needed to be synchronized. The patterns must match perfectly, Mira said, studying the flowing symbols. But each station shows different parts of the whole. Like two halves of a bridge, Jack added. We have to build it together. They worked in perfect sync, each calling out changes as they occurred. When Jack's display flashed red, Mira adjusted her controls to compensate. When Mira's station warned of overload, Jack quickly redistributed the power flow. The chamber responded to their cooperation. The pillar of light pulsed with each successful synchronization, growing stronger and clearer. But then came the real test. Warning, the mechanical voice announced. Final verification required. Life support systems will be synchronized. Their environmental suits suddenly powered down. The toxic atmosphere began seeping in through microscopic gaps. Jack felt his breath catching in his throat. Our suits, he gasped. They're linked to the stations. Mira's scales had paled with fear, but her voice remained steady. We must trust each other completely. Your air is now my air. My survival is your survival. They worked faster than ever, their movements perfectly coordinated. Each correct pattern restored a portion of their life support. One mistake would kill them both. The pressure mounted as their oxygen levels dropped. Last sequence, Mira called out. Her breathing labored. But I can't see the full pattern. I see it, Jack wheezed, his vision blurring. Mirror what I do, but reverse the flow. Their hands moved in unison across the controls. The chamber filled with blinding light. For a moment, both thought they had failed. Then fresh air flooded their suits, and the sealed door slid open. Test completed, the mechanical voice announced. Species compatibility confirmed. Access granted to planetary restoration protocols. New displays appeared, showing controls that could cleanse the planet's atmosphere. The ancient facility had been waiting for proof that different species could work together before revealing its true purpose. We did it, Jack said, still catching his breath. We actually did it. Mira touched his shoulder, a gesture she'd learned from him. No, friend. We proved something far more important. We proved they were right to hope. The chamber's lights shifted to a warm glow, illuminating more data about the facility's creators. But before they could explore further, both of their emergency beacons suddenly activated. Ships, Mira said, checking her sensors, from both our peoples. They looked at each other, knowing their time of peaceful cooperation was about to face its greatest challenge.